again. We're going to change our topic just a little bit from power music to talking about moving beyond the pipeline. So I have the pleasure of having Deepa Purushothaman, hopefully I didn't get that too wrong, National Managing Director of WIN at Deloitte. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It seems like a great day.
Deepa not only leads the Women's Initiative at Deloitte, but before that, she also was part of their telecom, media, and tech group. And in addition to leading WIN today, she's also a principal in the social impact service line of Deloitte. So you definitely seem to have your hands in a lot of different areas of the company and making a huge impact on their quite progressive move forward on advancing women and other protected groups. So I'm excited to chat with you today. And I think just hearing from our Girls Who Code alumni right before this panel, it's great to see young girls like her and others who are going through the program getting involved in technology. But it's also imperative at the same time that we make sure we don't put girls and her in situations where they end up on a team of 15 older men, right? So how do we, I want to talk a little bit about why it's so important that we keep women in the pipeline and keep them progressing through companies. So maybe you can just tell me a little bit about, why do you think that's important and what are some of the things you all are doing today at Deloitte on this front?
Sure. So let me maybe start a few years ago. So WIN was actually started 25 years ago, and WIN is our women's initiative. We were one of the first companies to start something like WIN 25 years ago, and it was actually started by our male CEO. So he looked around the table at a leadership meeting and kind of, talked about what we just heard about. Looked around the room and there weren't a lot of women sitting at the table at the senior ranks. And he said, we have a problem here and we need to change it and I need to change it. So WIN was started 25 years ago with this idea of we need to attract, retain, and advance women. And so I think all three parts of that are so important if we're going to solve some of the challenges that we've been talking about today. And so part of it is pipeline, but the other part of it is once women enter, how do you get them to stay? How do you get them to excel? How do you support their development? And I think those are all critical parts of this equation. And so what we've been doing is focusing on all those parts. I think we've made a ton of progress. And I was sharing with you earlier this week, what's interesting is we're finding a lot of the challenges that our women have traditionally faced and continue to face are progressing, and we've resolved a lot of them. But the issues that remain around finding ways to merge home and work, finding ways to balance things, are issues that our men are now starting to hit as well. And so it has been an interesting couple of years, I would say in the last 24 months, to really understand that the conversation has evolved, but it still seems to be a challenge, and we need to really evolve the corporate workplace so it works for everybody. And that needs to not only be about retaining and, attracting women, but also keeping them and advancing them once they get there. So I said a few different things in that statement, but I think that we have made progress, but there's still a lot to do, I guess is what I'm trying to focus on.
I'm curious, how many of the women here are part of women's networks or affinity groups that are sponsored by your companies? See all of my AppNexus Women's Network women in the front. So that's interesting. I actually didn't see as many hands up as I thought that I would. What role do you think WIN has played at Deloitte? And I get the sense that it's been quite important. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for us, our women's initiative wasn't necessarily just an affinity group, and I don't mean this in any sort of pejorative way. It was actually always more than that. So it was really around this: we need women at the leadership team, and the only way to do that is to show them they can do it and to develop their skills. It is important, but I also think it's evolving. So for us, there has been historical pieces of it that were really about creating a network so women could lean on each other and learn from each other. What we're finding these days is over 60%, almost 70% of our staff are millennials. And again, I hate the term, but I think it's the term that we use, right? Are the next generation, and this generation looks at the world differently. So we're actually finding, as we talk with them, this idea of affinity groups and this idea of WIN, although important, is something they struggle with fully embracing and fully accepting. And so part of the discussion we've been having very recently is how do we update WIN? I mean, there are aspects of a women's initiative that are absolutely critical, and it's my personal belief, I think until a lot of women reach the manager level or are managing others, they don't really encounter some of those challenges. I mean, I'm not saying everybody doesn't, but that a lot of the playing field has been equaled in a lot of ways. But traditionally, when you start to manage others and you hit that manager level, you can start to see challenges come up that you didn't really face before. And our millennials are just starting to hit those I don't want to call them ceilings, but those challenges. And as a result, they're realizing maybe I do need something like Win. So it's been an interesting process for us. Started more in this advancement and also just creating a situation where you could look around and see other women that look like you as an opportunity to show what's possible, but has really evolved into, I think, something more. It is really, I think, an open question for us, and I think for many companies on how you go forward. If it doesn't resonate for people, how do you take the important parts of it and move it forward so you don't lose the important parts that enhance people and give everyone equal opportunity, but maybe evolve it so that it is really addressing the evolving needs of our workforce.
So do you see it evolving into a group that supports not just women, but is more about allyship? And would that, do you think that sort of takes the place of a win, or is it in addition to it?
So I think it is a little bit of both, and we're figuring it out. I think for us right now, the way that we are starting to have the conversation is really issue focused. So we put out something just a few weeks ago around caregiving. It was a pretty progressive policy where we put out a policy that supports 16 weeks of caregiving. It is a pretty bold activity because it's not just for parental leave, it is actually for all caregiving. So if you want to or have a need to take care of an elderly parent, if there is a spousal situation. So it was a very open-ended policy, and part of why we did that was to address the needs of our women, who in a lot of ways, to be open, are still the ones that take care of a lot of the needs at home, but also to address the fact that men are starting to do that too. As roles change at home, they affect the workplace, and we need to address that and start to help people be successful. So to me, that policy is a way to describe or to show we're bringing men into the conversation, moving it to an issue lens, but not losing the fact that we need to really encourage women to stay in the workplace and take on some of the issues that have traditionally been challenging head on.
The policy that you all just released is fantastic. I mean, really progressive, and I think you all are really at the forefront. So I just want to pause on it for a moment. If you all didn't catch this news last week, so it's 16 weeks of paid leave, and it does not distinguish between primary and secondary caregiver, and it is explicitly not parental leave. This is caregiver leave, and so it's really acknowledging that your employee base has many different types of obligations, whether that's for parents or children. Can you talk a little bit about how did that policy come about? Was that employee driven? What was the impetus behind putting that in place?
Yes, so it came from a few different places, and I just would say the one other voiceover that I talk about when I talk about the policy is, to me, it's the first policy that is gender neutral on something like this, but it's also generational neutral. That idea that people have different needs in their life that they go through. It's not just parental leave, and that aspect of it is so tied to how I think inclusion is evolving and how we need to talk about it. So just want to start there. But it is so pivotal, and it came about because we have this growing need in our workforce, and people were asking different questions. It's also something that our CEO, Kathy Engelbert, kind of looked around and saw that this was a conversation that was coming up, and a lot of the speaking she did, and it was something that was very important. So I would say it came from a bubbling up of staff, but it also came from leadership and tone at the top, which is such a critical topic to get support on issues like this. It also came from some work we did earlier in the summer. We did this survey around Father's Day that talked about paternity leave, and the feedback was fascinating. It showed that men don't take the paternity leave that they're allowed in their companies because culturally it is still stigma. There's a stigma attached to taking it. And so it created this conversation externally and even within the firm to start to talk about what does that mean and what does that look like and what is changing. And so it started to kind of set the seed for maybe this is the right time to have that conversation. It was also our policy team that looked around and said, this is a huge conversation that's happening externally, and it's something we want to get in front of because it's important to us. And like was just said on the stage, it is about talent and how you attract and retain the best talent. And this is important to people. And so it was really from all of those things together. And so in some ways, the perfect storm that created a situation that told us this was the time to announce that.
Amazing. So bubble up those requests for caregiver leave. So the policy is fantastic. Of course, not all companies are going to be able to put in place these types of policies and support them. Are there other things that you think as leaders we can be doing to help encourage employees to feel the freedom to take the time if they need it and to focus on these priorities?
Absolutely. So I've talked about this great policy, and I think it is wonderful and game changing. But I think the policy is only as good as people taking it. So it's great to have a policy like that. But if we don't have people actually putting up their hand and saying, I'm going to take the 16 weeks and talking about it, I don't think you really change the culture, and you don't really have the effect that we could have with something like this. So for me, I think a big aspect of the work that we do and what we need to encourage more of all of us to do is modeling. So modeling and talking about the things that you do. So being really transparent in some ways about when you have to go take care of something personal. I wouldn't make a big deal about it, but sharing that in a way that makes sense. I mean, you've shared stories about what you do. I think just being open about that is huge. And also, especially when our leaders take leave or do something that maybe is different, talking about it. So on my teams, I am very transparent and open on when I block my calendar to take care of something. Just sharing that can be game changing. I think that modeling from the tone at the top, and also all of us just starting to be really open about the fact that we are, in order to have whole lives, we also have personal lives. And so much of the work that we do crosses into our private life that it's okay to set some boundaries and talk about it is part of what we need to do more commonly and really support each other in that dialogue.
Yeah, Deepa and I had a chance to talk earlier in the week, and I was sharing a couple of things. I block my calendar for school drop-off, and I'm really transparent with people about, I'm available to you any time of the day, but not during these 45 minutes that I need to do drop-off. Not really any time during the day. Or, just being really open with employees. I had sent an email saying I need to go take care of some things for my parents this weekend, and so I won't be here on Friday, and just making sure to sort of help set that tone. So I'm part of a dual working family. My husband also works, and I'm going to share with you all that it does feel like a bit of the home burden tends to fall to me, I think just naturally because I'm a woman. Something about, we're sort of like the natural caregivers. And he and I have actually had this little feud for the last week where I have refused to place our usualsoap.com order. And I'm just going to wait it out and see if he notices and does it. And so I've
As long as you have your private stash.
Yeah, oh no, I've been using my travel toothpaste all week, and I'm just waiting to ask him, what is he doing? So, and so a lot of this, though, is about the roles that we play in our household. And can you tell me a little bit about, why is it so important that we change these roles?
Again, I think the key is because so much of our private life and so much of what we do at work is so dependent on the flexibility and support we have at home that our lives bleed so much more than they used to, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, absolutely 20 years ago. So if we don't create that support mechanism and if we don't change the demands we have at home, it's sometimes hard to be focused at work when you're at work and find ways to do that. I actually married another partner in the firm. That's kind of how I've made my work and life, merge. And the fascinating part is a lot of the dialogue has been, we both do the same thing. We both travel. How are we going to make it work? And having those conversations. And I only got married a few years ago. So it's been 2 years, and so it's all new dialogue around who's going to do what and how we're going to figure it out. And he's Australian, so he's got a little bit of machismo or, a little bit of that Australian attitude that comes through too. So I think it's honestly a dialogue, and I think it's a conversation that you have and you figure out what works for you. I don't think there's one recipe to that, but I think you have to be really honest and really thoughtful about the fact that because our work tends to bleed into our personal life and because so many of us are in dual income families, that those conversations are so critical and so important, and the choices we make and our spouses can really have big impacts on what we do at work. And so being thoughtful and how you pick your spouse, but also thoughtful in the conversations you have and set your boundaries is really critical as well.
He actually usually does a pretty good job. I just want to see if he can figure out e-commerce. But beyond just picking your partner, it does strike me that there are challenges. I mean, you cited the lack of men taking paternity leave. There's a whole different set of challenges that men face in the workplace. And you and I have talked a little bit about how until we start to put in place a framework to shift those challenges, that women can't themselves also advance in the workplace, right? It's all sort of this virtuous circle. Are there things that as managers and employers that we should be doing to help on the maternity and paternity leave front?
Well, I think just creating an atmosphere where we are supportive and encourage our people to take it regardless of gender is absolutely critical. I think if people don't take it, we should actually ask them to. I was having this conversation, I think, with one of your colleagues, and saying that it's really important to not just have it, but to show that you take it and to come back and talk about taking it. So on my teams, we often ahead of time talk about the fact that someone may go out in a few months and what does that look like, but also importantly, when they come back, obviously you don't know what the situation is until you have your baby and, you figure it out for yourself. But once you come back, how the reintegration, what that looks like, and making sure you have a support mechanism and conversations ahead of time. Because usually what we find, and this has been historically true of women, the reintegration is harder. It's not necessarily the taking the leave, but it's the coming back and what you're coming back to and the perceptions and the stereotypes and the challenges around that. So being really open-minded in the workplace and ahead of time about what the challenges could be, and making sure that you have that dialogue and figure it out, and that you have support around you. It's not a clean and clear process, and it is one where having people who've done it before you, having processes around you to support you, both at home and at work, because although everyone likes to believe they figured it out, it's not usually until you come back and start to do it that you realize what you need, and it's an evolving process. I also think the biggest lesson learned for us is that our men are wanting to take it as well. So I'm not saying that they do, but the fact of the matter is on my teams, my male staff want to take it just as much. And so it is happening whether or not we want it to happen. I think what we're seeing is we need our leaders to also emulate and to model and to make it a conversation that when they come back, everybody, that we talk about it and continue to figure out ways to make it better, because it's still an evolving conversation for most companies.
On some level, you almost hope that they have a spouse or partner at home who's saying, aren't you going to take your leave? And so we sort of keep this process going. Out of curiosity, how many of you have had a manager ask you before, have you taken your vacation, and encouraging you to actually take that? Great. That's actually pretty positive. It's got a nice show of hands.
No, it's a great show of hands. I think it's that sort of example of if sometimes if you don't ask the question, people don't take it, and you can create that situation if you take it and you talk about it and you encourage your peers to take it.
Great. Well, I think this has been a fantastic conversation. You all, again, are doing some really progressive work at Deloitte, and I'm excited to see it. I hope that the work that you're doing sort of continues into the fabric, and I know that at AppNexus, we're certainly looking to you all as the models and trying to move forward. So it's great. Thank you again for all of the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you.